1, 2, 3, 4.
Mr. Peters, what's happening, Vanessa?
Good morning, my brother. Even though it's evening for you, but good morning over here from Korea. How's it going?
Right, so my sister here, guys, she has woken up early on her work day to come and accommodate us. So right now in South Korea, it is 6 o'clock in the morning, or 6:15, should I say? And Vanessa has, is that right? 6 o'clock?
Yeah, 6 o'clock.
Yeah, 6:15. So she's mashed up her sleep to do this. I mean, if she'd asked me to do the same thing, I don't know what she would have got from me. That's what maybe would have happened. Yeah.
I would have got cussed. What I would have got.
So I appreciate, Vanessa, I appreciate you having come on to check this out. Dad wanted to watch on Instagram, but he hasn't got Instagram. I didn't have time to set him up with Instagram. I know Mum's watching. I know she's sitting upstairs watching.
They could just watch on the same system.
But Mum's upstairs, Dad's downstairs.
Okay.
So, yeah, Mum didn't think about it. She could have come down and watched it with Dad. But anyway, it's all good, guys. So I just want to present my sister who is 9 years younger than me. And she was, my surprise sister. I didn't, always wanted to have a younger sibling because I was the baby. I was used to being the youngest. And then Vanessa came along. And now she's moved off and she's doing her own thing. She moved to South Korea, which was just an unusual kind of destination for a lot of Black people, particularly, and definitely in our family culture, where most of our family are based either in the Caribbean or in America. So having a sister that had moved to South Korea was definitely something that was very brave and very admirable, for sure. So guys, I just want you to just put your hands together and welcome my sister as she comes to talk all good things South Korea and all shookness Korea as well.
안녕하세요, 여러분. 저는 Vanessa입니다. Hi, wagwan. This is Vanessa, aka Soul Nessie. Hope you're well. Thank you for supporting my brother all these years. And yeah, we're just here to talk about what I'm doing in Korea, especially as a Black woman, a Black British woman in particular, because sometimes we tend to forget that we as Black people culturally tend to experience different stuffs in comparison to like American Black, European Black, UK Black, Australian Black. But yeah, I'm just here to share some light with my life as it has been over the past now 3.5 years that I've been living over here in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And any questions that my brother wants to pose to me. Yeah, let's get started. I'm excited. Yes, it's early, but to be honest, the sun's up.
Yes.
And so I feel awake and clean. Good. And I'm going to go and study. I'll do some studying after this anyway. So
excellent.
It's all good.
Yeah, because I was worried that I didn't want to see my sister looking all swell up. You know, in the morning, people's face will swell up. I didn't want to swell up face on the interview. But it's all good. We're here. So the first question I want to ask you, let's take us back a little bit. Why South Korea, and what was your interest in South Korea? How did that all begin?
Okay, so this kind of stems back to my childhood. When I was like 9 years old or 10 years old, I was always fascinated to a certain extent with East Asian culture, in particular Japanese culture. My brother knows this. My family knows this. I was always watching Japanese animation.
Would you say that's what triggered it? Or
no, that's definitely what triggered it.
Okay.
Because everything that has happened since then stemmed from there. So when I would be watching Fox Kids from a young girl, like watching Digimon, watching Pokemon, Sailor Moon, all of those things, I would grow my interest from that. And then,
by the way, let me just jump in. Let me just jump in there. These are these programs that we used to be forced to watch, and I didn't want to watch any of these things, and I used to be vexed. And I think that's why I'm no longer into TV, because I ended up just not watching what I didn't want to watch. So yeah, here we go. But
you wanted a younger sibling. This is the pain you have of having a younger sibling. You have to share the entertainment. Anyway, yeah, so as I got older and like the internet started to get a lot more prevalent in our lives, especially when I went over to university, I was watching a lot more animation, but then I would be interested in Japanese music. And from then, I found this YouTube video of a Korean girl group. And I thought, this is interesting. I didn't actually know what this music was, but I kind of I didn't recognize the language. I started getting into it. The song was actually Girls' Generation G.
Mm-hmm.
So I started getting into things like that, and I started finding out more about the music and the culture. And then I started getting into K-pop and then Korean culture after that. That was about maybe 2008, around that time.
Right, 2008.
And there was a certain point, because fast forward a couple of years down the line, I had been to Japan and I had been to Korea. So I've been to Japan once, then I was in Korea probably about 2 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, I want to learn one of these 2 languages. I'll either learn Japanese or I'll either learn Korean. But I didn't know which one to go with first. So I made a list at home and selecting like the pros and cons of the 2 languages, like what would be good, what would be easy, what would be not easy, what would be fun, what would be useful, etc., etc. And it essentially boiled down to the actual language scripts itself. Korean is a very phonetic language where if you can learn the letters itself in about 4 days. If you dedicate yourself in 4 days, you can learn and read Korean. You may not understand.
Okay, so when you say phonetic, phonetic for those who probably English is their second language, you're saying that it's very much based on sounds, and it's very much based on it's very easy. Like what you see is what it is, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly,
right, okay.
Exactly. Whereas Japanese, in terms of the writing system and the letter system, there's 3 different letter systems in Japanese, and you know me, I'm studious, but I'm also quite lazy. So I thought that would be too much for me to handle. So I started learning Korean. At this point now, I've been learning Korean for about 6 years. Okay. And then after the 4th time I visited Korea, I came back from my trip in 2016, April 2016. I was missing. Each time I came back, I missed the city more and more. I missed Korea more and more. And I was at a place at my job where I was working that job for about 3 years in my last job in London. No promotion, no development whatsoever. I just felt stagnant. Everyone around me was either moving up or left. There was a point in my last company, in the space of about 3 months, 10 people had left the company.
Right.
So, there was nothing happening. I thought, I can't stay here.
Right.
Life in London is not... I'm not developing in myself. So I took that big jump, and then I remember sitting down with Mum one day, and I was like, Mum, I need to move, and I need to move out of London. I need to go to Korea, because I feel like my future is in Korea.
Right.
Sorry, said you left me.
Well, don't worry, I've already had Mum tell me I'm too rude on the air already.
But Mum said, Mum was my biggest supporter. She was like, I came to this country. She moved from Grenada to the UK in order to make her own life here. So it's time for her children to do the same thing, wherever that may be in the world. And Mum was the biggest inspiration. She left the Caribbean when she was a teenager.
19
and
years
then
old.
moved to the UK with no friends, coming from a very hot temperate to a very wet temperate as well. So I thought, if she can do it at a time when technology was not that prevalent, and her contact back to her family was like letters and one-off phone calls and things like that, why can't I do the same? And do you know what? It's been 3.5 years. I've never looked back.
So in your mind, I guess for you, even though the concept of maybe as a black person, a black female being in Korea may be quite alien to most, from your point of view, the concept of traveling and really making drastic cultural changes is not alien to you, and probably not alien to the family culture even.
I mean, precisely. Especially in particular to our family,
right.
we're all spread over. It may be in places where there's other black people, but culture is not the same for every single black person. So with our family growing up in Antigua and Grenada, life is not necessarily going to be the same in New York or in Atlanta or in the UK. Life is going to be different no matter which area you're going to. So despite the fact I'm going into a country where I'm vastly outnumbered by the majority, moving has always been in our blood. Moving has always been, we've never really stayed in the area that we grew up in. I mean, we can talk about historically about like slavery and being taken from one place to the next anyway, but that's another conversation in another time. Right. But in terms of trying to find ourselves and move around. That's just human nature, I think.
Sure.
So it makes sense. I mean, it's understandable. Some people will go, "Oh, I would not feel comfortable. I'm used to what I know. It's better the devil you know than the devil you don't." But I just think for me, then it's a bit of a waste. Because I can stay in London, I can get that promotion and stay and do whatever, but I don't feel like I'm growing. I don't feel like I'm developing myself as a person, and I'm growing to the potential that I have. And my interests, if my interests are over there, then why not go over there? If my interest is somewhere else, then go somewhere else.
So from a professional perspective, because you was obviously studying journalism when you was in the UK, what was your initial intention for you when you were going to go to Korea? What was your vision of what you would hope to have done?
I mean, it's still my intention to this day. My goal moving over there was to educate or to try and put my own influence as a black person and a British person for South Korea. At the moment, South Korea is a nation that's trying to expand itself globally. So especially with the boost of its culture and cultural awareness, and a lot more people are being aware of like South Korea as a whole, as a nation, but it's still very much a homogenous country, and it's a nation where it's been quite closed off because it's a peninsula with North Korea above it, so it doesn't really have any external influences, or not that much external influences compared to, say, the Americas or the UK, who have been traveling all around for hundreds of years. So for me, I wanted to go over there step by step, but like I have my 14 step plan of what I want to do, but ultimately I do want to still get into media, journalism, radio or whatever in South Korea as a black British woman, and spread what I know about my own culture so they can understand more about the world a little bit step by step.
Interesting. And so, well, that's really good. And obviously, the public speaking, I guess, has always been part of the family when it's been traced even deeper. For yourself now, so having been there for 3 years, what would you say it has been like for yourself as a black person? What is the positives being a black person in Korea, and what are the negatives?
As a disclaimer, I'm going to say this. My experiences are not universal. So what I experience as a black woman for myself, not only as a British black person, but as a black person in general, is not going to be the same as everyone else. So do not come to Korea if you are thinking of the same and expect that your experience is going to be the same, because it's not going to be. Coming over here, I haven't experienced anything in particular that I would say negative. Of course, you're going to get like the older generation who are going to be a bit apprehensive because, once again, South Korea is homogenous, but it's 98% Korean in terms of the population. And foreigners make up for that 2%. And even in that 2%, 60% of that is Asian related. Black people account for maybe like 0.8% of the general population of South Korea. So coming over here, you still get the odd look here or there. Like I still get glared at sometimes, but it's mostly like the older people who would glare. But then I wouldn't glare back. I will either like stare back or just smile. And then the two things I will either do is smile back or just turn away.
So what you're not getting is what I hear in China is where they can be quite invasive, where they've got the camera in your face doing this. You're not seeing any of that in Korea.
No. I mean,
that's interesting.
There have been some instances where some of the older people will come over and like ask me questions about my hair. Like if my hair's in cornrows, especially if it's colorful cornrows, they'll come up to me and be like, "Oh, your hair's really pretty," blah 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 blah, and they'll talk to me, or like some of the younger kids will look up in fascination or something like that. But nothing to me personally, anything particularly hostile. I think any hostile reaction would be actually to my size, not necessarily to my skin color. Right. Like I've had a couple of people mumble underneath their breath in Korea saying, "Oh, this girl is too fat," and then
assuming that you don't understand. Assuming
that I don't understand. Yeah, and I replied back like I can actually understand Korean, and then that will kind of embarrass them because Korean culture, there's something that they have which is called nunchi, which is like a sense of awareness. It doesn't really translate well in English, but a sense of awareness. And if you kind of call them out on something that is a bit deep, that they'll feel uncomfortable about it. So sometimes I don't like playing that card, but it's almost like people need to stop thinking that all foreigners do not understand Korean. Like some foreigners, a lot of foreigners don't understand Korean, but if you're here long term, you have to start learning the language. So I'm like, don't mumble underneath your breath, like expecting that I'm not going to understand.
So is it almost like a kind of an unspoken culture where if you call somebody out on it, there's an immediate embarrassment associated with having to have been called out?
Pretty much, yes. I mean, a lot of people would try to claim that, Myra said it best, reading the room, like understand reading the room.
Right.
A lot of foreigners would like to claim that Koreans are very antagonistic towards foreigners. Mm-hmm. I don't see it as that. Actually, the most antagonistic I've seen Koreans be is to other Koreans.
Right.
Like they would be a lot more argumentative and a lot more abrasive to each other, whereas to a foreigner it would be very much like distancing, the social distancing. Mm-hmm. But with some people, they do like speak up a bit grumpily, like kind of like the bitter old person kind of mentality. And if you do call them out on it, sometimes I don't. But if it's very direct towards me and like other people have heard it, then I'm going to be like, okay, no, I'm not taking that, because you need to know that foreigners are here. You can't be snarky like that and assume that I'm not going to understand. I'm someone who likes to stand up for myself. But those kind of instances I can count on one hand, basically.
But it's interesting because one of the things, I mean, for those guys and anyone interested in seeing Vanessa's story, I would recommend that at the end of this you follow her, give her a follow. But one of the things that you do often mention in your Instagram stories is often your frustrations towards the older generation culture. Could you talk a little bit more about that and what are the kind of the tensions or the observations you make?
So in Korea, it's very much a hierarchical society, where you have to address anyone who is older than you with respect, no matter who that person is, no matter how old it is. So someone who is 8 years old automatically has to respect someone who is 10 years old. Someone who is 15 has to respect someone who is 20 years old. There's a word for it. In the same companies, it's like sambe, which like you respect that person. So a lot of older people will have this mindset of, I am older, so therefore I am correct, I am right. So what you will notice is, especially like on public transportation, old people would ignore cues and just move up to the front. Or like you try to get off somewhere and they will automatically shove themselves on. Or if there is someone who is pregnant, they will just sit down in the pregnancy seat with ignoring like the pregnant person or someone with an injury because they assume that person is younger than me, so it doesn't matter. I have the priority. I have the right of way. There was an interesting fight about 2 months ago of two old men arguing with one another, and the main thing, like they were going back and forth saying, "I'm older than you. No, I'm older than you. How old are you?" They were both like maybe in their 60s, 70s. But they were both having that kind of fight. Wow. So it's very much stemmed in that kind of culture, and a lot of because I'm a teacher. And a lot of the kids that I speak to actually hate that. They don't like that kind of mindset.
I guess there's a clear disconnect between the younger generation and the older generation regarding this.
Precisely, yeah. Excellent. So, like, the kids don't really like... I mean, they don't mind addressing each other as, like... if that person's older, they will address them with respect. But a whole idea of, I'm older, therefore I know better... mindset they really don't like. And to be honest, that's prevalent in Western culture as well, but it's something that it almost runs the country a little bit in Korea. So whatever people establish or whatever people do, if that person is older, it's like don't ask, don't tell. And
do you think that can potentially, I mean, what's your opinion on it? Do you think it could potentially harm new progress, or do you think there's a security in guaranteeing that maybe processes that work still or fulfilled? I mean, yeah, what's your thoughts around that?
I would say it's definitely holding the country back in terms of development or the kind of development that it wants to do. I mean, we have to remember that South Korea, that we know it, is still a very new country. This country was at war with the North in the 1950s, and it was in relative poverty up until about the 1980s.
Right.
So the rich country that we know of today is something that's only been around for the last 30 years or so, 30, 40 years.
Mm-hmm. And
even then, we can still see the echoes of the past in its infrastructure, in its idealism. It's definitely a hold back. I mean, it's nice with the element of respect, because especially with what's been happening with coronavirus and COVID-19, that element of listening to the others, know what they're talking about, that has helped in terms of controlling the situation. But I feel like in terms of international development, business, I don't know if you can hear this truck that's going past.
No,
but good. So in terms of business, in terms of global expenditure, because the culture is so completely different to, say, not completely different, but like in terms of understanding and business relationships and the kind of work ethics that they have is different to, say, in America or in the UK.
Yeah.
That might be a difficult thing to process and to be successful in until that kind of attitude dies off with the older generation in, say, 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, sure. I remember when I'm just reading a comment that Tammy just said, and this is why she said, on the back of what you said, she said, this is why so many of the younger generation migrate. They leave the country. But I remember just on the back of that, because I want to kind of move it forward, but I remember one time when you tried to hook me up with, at the time, it was, to this day, we still don't know who the artist was, but one of the top K-pop artists. And they were interested in me doing a video, but just the way that they worked and the way that I wanted to work was completely different. Whereas I wanted to get my agency to get involved, to work with them. They just didn't want that. They expected me to just be on standby. And because I guess of who they are and how big they are in their world, they were just expecting that whenever I said jump, I'll be ready to get in the next plane whenever they wanted, which is completely doesn't work in the UK like this. So that right there was my first experience of realizing that difference between kind of the Western world and South Korean kind of culture of working.
I mean, business is changing. You'll notice that a lot more K-pop artists are working with Western artists now, because a lot more of these companies are aware of they have to be a bit more malleable in terms of their business connections to be able to go get those collaborations. But the company in question, the one that you're talking about, they're still relatively new to Western connections. Right. So they didn't know that was the way that operates. So in future, probably they will be aware of it.
Okay.
But for now, it's still like a learning process for Korea as a whole. So there's an interesting transition that's happening right now in the country.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, so moving on a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about COVID. We're going to try and spend maybe less than 10 minutes on it, but I want to just hear your take on what has been this experience with COVID, because Korea was one of the kind of almost flagship countries in that they got it quickly. So from your observation, what was South Korean like from your perspective?
So it kind of started picking up around early February. I remember seeing the first few cases in early February. And the initial cases were foreign brought. So it was coming from China, it was coming from Wuhan. So at the beginning, interestingly enough, a couple of businesses and a couple of places were like, oh, no foreigners allowed, because they like to tar all foreigners with that brush, no matter where they were. So it's like, they would say, oh, no foreigners. If they see a black person, they'll be like, oh, no foreigners because of coronavirus. And they did the same thing with the African swine flu, or whatever it was.
Right.
That had happened recently. So they did the same thing, that tar all foreigners with the same brush. Unfortunately, the thing that kind of changed things around was when Shincheonji, the religious sect, when multiple members of that, and I won't call it a church because they call themselves a church, but it's not really a church. But once that sect had a good few thousand people infected but mostly because of one or two people who were inside the sect, got infected with coronavirus, and that was based in Daegu, which is like southeast of Korea. And from 1 or 2 or 3 infections per day, it then jumped to like 600, 700, 800 per day. And South Koreans as a whole are it's a very hypochondriac nation. So they worry about everything in terms of health, in terms of like illness and everything. Like they will go to hospital for a cold. Like if you go to the UK for a cold, you get kicked out.
You get laughed out. You get 2 foot in your bottom.
Exactly. But in South Korea, you can go for like injections just for a cold and then come back. So like whenever I feel a bit peaky at work, my co-workers will be like, I'll go to the hospital. But it's like, I'm just so used to not going to the hospital, it doesn't make sense for me. But because of that, then they have to turn around and be like, okay, we are not having what we have with swine flu, because South Korea also got quite hit badly with swine flu back in 2005, I think it was.
Right, yeah. I just remember all the reggae music songs cussing out swine flu on it. Yeah.
But then they learned from that, so they turned around quickly with the testing and all of that, because of the fact that they were. I think they had like things in place just in case something like that happened again. Right. So I was actually off for 2 weeks. I didn't work for 2 weeks, and then also my work, which is really good. We switched to online teaching because we wanted to, because obviously parents were not comfortable sending their kids during this whole boom, because we were seeing like cases coming from different areas, different regions. So we offered online classes, so we would still come in, or some teachers would stay at home and we would just teach online classes, which worked for what it was, because my academy, because it's not really a school, my academy was like a maximum of one class is 14 students. Okay. So then average would be like 8 to 10 students per class, even 2 students per class. And it worked out really, really well. So I was still able to teach in a relatively normal situation. And even still, we got the announcement yesterday that schools will start slowly opening from the 11th of May, with a full opening by the 1st of June, because everyone's still worried about a second wave that could hit. Yeah. But as of now, we have only had 10 domestic transferences of the disease in 5 days, which is really good. Like the majority of the infections have come, they've all been from overseas, and they come. You have to do a mandatory seclusion for 2 weeks. They will either put you in a government facility somewhere, or if you have an address in Korea, you stay in that address. Right. You have an app that you have to download. You have to take your temperature 2 times a day. If you don't download the app and you don't put in your temperature, they could either fine you if you're a Korean citizen or deport you if you're
okay, so they're really not playing. It's really interesting because 2 things that I just want to pick up on. First thing is, you were saying that, again, you said something that had been unfolding in China and been causing a bit of unrest in the black community, which was that in China they were doing a similar thing, particularly aimed at black people, where they were saying they were banning them in certain places, not the whole of China, but I think a particular town. And in that particular town, certain organizations were banning black people under the impression that they maybe were carrying the diseases or whatever. So that caused a little bit uproar. It sounds like what you're saying to me, that a similar thing was happening in Korea, but to all foreigners. But as soon as the realization that a lot of the majority of the infection was coming from church, it's sects, then the attention shifted from that towards its own people almost. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Because it stopped becoming a thing of blame the foreigner, which it tends to happen. Yeah. It then turned around to actually we caused the problem. They called this person patient 31 because they were the 31st person to be recognized to be infected by the disease. Right, okay. And they were at this church service. They were like AWOL for 2 weeks. And then because they were kept going to this service, then it boomed, because South Korean culture is very close-knit community. They would share food with one another, touchy-feely, and also especially some of the older people, they're not the most hygienic, because I'll talk to my Korean friends and they will tell me that they weren't really taught about hygiene obviously, because around when they were growing up, it was a very poor nation. So a lot of the habits that people would have as an older person, they never really learned about it. So people will still be spitting in the streets, or even spitting inside train stations and things like that. Just coughing without covering their mouth or anything,
or in awareness of anyone around them, kind of thing.
Exactly, or just not really caring, or not realizing that actually this is something that you should be doing. So they had like several campaigns, posters telling them how to cough. Don't cough with your hands, cough into your elbow, maintain distancing, 2 meters, 2 weeks, things like that. And the government also would be sending like text messages to your phone. If you live in a particular area where there has been someone with the coronavirus that's been reported, they will send you a text message saying, so-and-so from this district, male age 37 or whatever, has established a coronavirus.
You get hot up quickly.
Yeah. Wow. Check the website, check where they've gone, and they have like full details. So like 2 o'clock, Thursday, they were at this store. 4 o'clock Thursday, they were there. So it lists out, because then if you had been to those places around those times, the idea is then you go and get tested because you were probably around the person and around that moment. That's moment. So that's how they caught people really quickly.
Yeah, I mean that's crazy. And the thing is, you said something that I really didn't know. You said to me that even during the isolation phase, all the big chain stores are open.
Yeah, so like the convenience store, so there was social distances, but there wasn't a lockdown.
Right.
So shops were open, places were still open, all of that. The problem is, like in comparison to say the UK, the reason why we didn't have a full lockdown here is because people follow the rules. Right. So like if they said, don't go out if you don't need to, people did not go out if they didn't need to. So like if they said maintain social distancing, wear a mask, people would wear a mask. You will get cussed. I've seen people got cussed at the early days if they weren't wearing a mask. So everyone was wearing a mask here. Even now, with the numbers still low, I still say 2/3 of people will still be wearing masks to keep up with the health and the government response that they've been offering. So, and I think that's where the UK have been a bit lax, especially in Western culture, where they don't really want to follow the rules, or like, I'm going to do it my own way, or I'm fine, I'm going to do like this, but then it's not really thinking about the community as a whole.
Yeah. That's really, I mean, I remember you spoke about it, and obviously for England, not unfortunately, we are a nation where if we don't give, because I think part of the problem was in the UK, they wasn't given clear instructions, and unfortunately, with a country like UK, which was so used to liberalism, it has to be this or this. You can't give people the choice, because if you give people the choice, people don't want to stay put. So, for example, I saw one group of guys outside the house at the early stage of lockdown, outside the house, talking, and I'm like, you clearly don't live together. And then in the end, they all gave each other an elbow spud, and I'm thinking, but mate, you've already spent the last 5 minutes giving each other the COVID virus 4 times. It's crazy. So, okay, so let's move on, because again, we're running out of time. It's just so much to say. You've shared a lot already, Vanessa. Let's move on and talk a little bit about K-pop. I've never understood K-pop. I know that's something you've always been a big fan of, and then when you've played me music, my interpretation has always been, this just sounds like mainstream Western music with Koreans singing over it. So what is your take on it, and what is the history of K-pop, so people understand?
I would say K-pop as a whole was definitely like Western influenced. The K-pop as we know it of today started around like the mid-90s, where it was very influenced by like American boy bands, or like a new soul, new jack swing kind of thing, where a lot of the early groups were very like jumpy, move around, hey, very influenced by like R&B groups of the 1990s in particular. Idol culture, which is probably the kind of things that people see today, was actually stemmed from Japan, where they were kind of built up this perfect image. So a K-pop idol is not just a K-pop singer. It's not just a singer. A K-pop idol is someone who does everything. So they have the looks, they can dance, they can sing and perform, they can act, they can do everything. It's like a perfect package.
So they're groomed.
Yeah, so they're groomed, they are trained. So there's a training process. So some of these idols will be training for maybe like 2 years, 3 years before they actually debut as a group or as a solo artist. So they are portrayed as this beacon of perfection and then put into the world. So there is no profanity for them, no drinking, no dating. At least in public, because in public they have to portray this image of perfection.
Squeaky clean,
And if you, especially in the first couple of years when you are debuting, if you have debuted, if you break that kind of idealistic perfection, you will get ripped apart.
Yeah.
Even though the South Korean culture, they themselves will be drinking a lot, they will smoke a lot or whatever. An idol's not meant to do that. An idol's meant to be like the perfect image of an artist.
So it's almost like saying a K-pop idol. Almost, it sounds like from what you're describing to me, they almost have to live like a priest or a clergy.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, it's a beacon of perfection that you have to be the perfect weight. You have to have the perfect body. There's no overweight idols. You will notice if you scrolled around, there is no overweight idols. And an idol who puts on a little bit of weight would be called fat. No males, or very rarely will a male have facial hair, because it's like it's also the kind of beacon of innocence as well. Dating not allowed because you belong to the fans. Drinking only when you are older, because again you have to portray this and everything. And it's, for me, I don't like that element of it. I understand it, and I'm like, okay, what it is, what it is. Without it, it would not be K-pop. Me personally, I was in it for the music. And the reason why I got into K-pop was because it sounded very nostalgic to me. Okay. So the kind of songs that I listened to, especially like when I first started getting into K-pop, sounded like the music I used to grow up with in the 90s or the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. So for me, and especially maybe a lot of fans around my age who got into K-pop around that time, that's the reason why they got into the music, because it harked back to the childhood music that we used to listen to. So that's why I liked it.
So one of the guys here, Baby J mentioned, J Park. Is that one of the artists himself?
Well, he was a K-pop artist. Right. He was someone. He's Korean American. Right. He debuted in this group called 2 PM back in around 2007, 2008. I want to say. Mm-hmm. He was the leader of 2 PM, and then. He said something negative about Korea on MySpace, back in the day of MySpace. And the fans found it. Because obviously he's Korean American, so his mindset is American style.
Yeah, of course.
And the Korean style, American style is very different.
Yeah.
So fans got really angry, demanded that he was kicked out, so he got kicked out of the group. So he had to go back to America. He then came back to Korea as a solo artist, solo independent hip-hop. He established his own music industry, music group, AOMG, self-producing, does a lot of things now. And now, actually, he signed up to Tidal, Jay-Z and Beyonce's label. So he's part of that now. So he's like the forefront of Korean American hip-hop music and all of that. So he's doing very, very well. But he's someone who went through the whole idol process and was burnt by it. So he then was like, okay, well, I'm not going to be an idol. He's now like heavily tattooed, nose piercings, everything, swears a lot, does whatever he wants. And he's respected for it in the Korean music industry.
Well, that was interesting, because it was going to be my next question, because I would say what I'm starting to notice, particularly in the UK, I don't know how that is even for America, where you're getting a lot of pop stars. So like you have artists like Adele, which you know. You've got Lewis Capaldi. Do you know Lewis Capaldi?
Yeah.
And I think Lewis Capaldi for me is a perfect example. He's someone that is not your typical pop star. You know, he's not eye candy necessarily. He has a lot of charisma. Ed Sheeran's another perfect example. These are not people that I think girls would want to pin up in on their posters in their bedroom. However, they have a talent, and they are getting appreciated for their talent and their personality. So, would you say there are voices in Korea that are kind of voicing the alternative? Because I know you've also talked to me about the fact that mental health was a big issue in the K-pop industry for artists. The pressure was too much. Is there voices that are kind of trying to speak something alternative?
In the Korean music industry, not so much. In the K-pop industry, there are a few idols who want to speak up and to talk about mental health, but we have to remember that mental health is still stigmatized in South Korea. So it's still seen as like, don't ask, don't tell. So people don't really talk about depression or anything like that because it's a sign of weakness. I mean, we still consider it a sign of weakness in the West as a whole.
Yeah.
But in South Korea, this is very much a big thing. And there are a few artists, but it's only if they've been around in the industry for a long time. So like a debuted artist is not going to stand up and be like, okay, yeah, let's talk about depression, let's talk about mental illnesses. I would say in the past 3 years or so, there's been more awareness, people are a bit more understanding. So a lot of idols now do take breaks for mental health issues. So they say, okay, this person's is taking a hiatus for 6 months because they are suffering from like panic disorder or whatever.
Okay.
That's something that never used to happen 10 years ago.
Okay.
I mean, I would say it's probably because of the prevalence of big name deaths and big name suicides that's happened over the past couple of years. Last year we had 2 major suicides, Sole and Guhara, who committed suicide, both of them for different reasons. One because there's a general depression, but another one because she was like a victim of sexual harassment as well, and all of that was all over the news, all over the internet. And probably the biggest name in recent years, Jonghyun from SHINee, which is one of the biggest groups in South Korea. They were still at that time at the peak. Mm-hmm. So then for him to commit suicide while they were at the peak was a big shock. Right. I remember I was finding it difficult to teach because I was like, this man has been part of my life for the best part of nearly 10 years, and he's just now suddenly gone. It was shocking. And I think from that, people started to realize, okay, we need to start taking things seriously. So I'll say after Jonghyun's death, people started going, okay, we need to take mental health a bit more realistic.
And I think particularly, sorry, I didn't mean to cut in there. Particularly, I guess if the outside world is looking in as well, it really steps in. Okay, less than 2 minutes, so I want to really wrap this up. We can go on more quite clearly, and first of all, I just want to say thank you so much, Vanessa, for kind of sharing a lot of your stories. And in fact, even some of the stuff that you said, I actually didn't even know this until recently, which is what motivated me to interview you. How can people follow you and talk very quickly in a few seconds about your blogs and stuff that you do? Okay, so I run a blog called Soul to Soul. So if you see me on YouTube, it is Soul to Soul. On Facebook, again, Soul to Soul. I also have a podcast as well, Soul to Soul, the show, where I do weekly podcasts, which is available on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor. Just search it, and I'm there. Also, I am on Instagram and Twitter, and on TikTok as well as Soul Nessie. I update regularly, find out all my stories, and let's continue the conversation on there. So then, well, I guess for a start, you mentioned quite a lot. I know not everybody's going to be able to kind of I know not everybody's going to be able to remember what you've said. They can at least follow you. And what I would say, if there's anybody that kind of has anything that's resonated with Vanessa, anything that kind of sets a set of intrigue, feel free to message my sister and give us some feedback about maybe anything that stood out for yourself in the conversation. This has been a very different conversation tonight. So Vanessa, thank you for waking up super early, because if it was me and you asked me to thingy before, I would agree to say yes, you would have been
exactly. All I would have heard in my ears, and I want to trust you back.
And then positive when we get on the camera. So exactly, so I appreciate this. And guys, thank you for listening and showing interest in quite a different conversation to what we normally do. So Vanessa, I guess it's just about enjoying your day.
Yes. Luckily, it's Children's Day, which is a national holiday here. Okay. So I'm resting for today. So I'm going to go back to sleep, and I'm going to wake up, do an online class, and then I'm going to carry on with my studies. So that's me for today.
And very quickly before you do go, I heard we've only got 20 seconds. Shooting in South Korea, is that an issue? You've got 50 seconds. It's not an issue. Okay. So the news is just hyping it up here. So the news is just hyping. Okay. Right, there you had it. Got propaganda going on before they lock us off. Well, I've got 15 seconds. Thank you very much, Vanessa. have yourself a great day, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you, all the listeners.
No problem.
See you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Catch you later.
See you soon. All right, bye.